Jake Pierce. I'm a field organizer. And yeah, my name is Jake Pierce. I'm a field organizer and policy analyst for Abundant Housing LA. And we do a lot of organizing on the east side and in Northeast LA. So we're hosting a community meeting in conjunction with City of LA planning on. I'm just going to turn down the music. I had just some little Yimby playlist going for y'all. So the City of LA has something called the housing element. The housing element is basically how a city plans for its next 8 years of housing growth, zoning changes, housing programs, and we were really involved in city housing elements at Abundant Housing LA, commenting, you can be more ambitious, you can build more housing, you can do a better job protecting tenants. And then after we got through all that, the city then had to go and actually implement its plan. And how are we going to build this housing? How are we going to do these rezonings? So that is where the city is now. That is where we are. And the city is getting ready to implement its plan for how to build all this housing. It's a very interesting plan. It's called the Citywide Housing Implementation, Citywide Housing Incentive Program. Thank you. And it doesn't actually include any rezoning. We have a few concerns about it. We're concerned about the city doing enough to reverse segregation patterns. Is the city doing enough to build housing in high opportunity areas, close to good jobs, close to good schools, close to transit? But also, is this ambitious enough? It's very, very opaque, very unclear how much housing this is going to produce, and if this is going to build the hundreds of thousands of units that we need to get us out of this housing shortage, to make LA affordable again, like it was decades past, and to make LA better than it ever has been before, to make it more equitable, to make it more accessible, and to make it a place, where everyone can afford to live. So we got a lot of work to do, and we're going to be breaking down this housing plan today. We got a great presentation coming up from Scott Epstein, my colleague, the Policy and Research Director at Abundant Housing LA, and Aaron Barrall from UCLA Lewis Center. And then on April 27th, we're going to have the community meeting at El Sereno Library, 10 a.m. to hear the city's presentation, hear what their vision is for this CHIP program, and tell them what we think. Tell them if we have concerns. Tell them where we think they can do better. So if the chapter leads, Leslie and Thomas, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Say hi.
You first, Thomas.
Hello, everyone. For those who know me, I'm Thomas. I'm one of the leads for Eastside Housing for All, and all that entails. I live in City Terrace with my family, and yeah, just excited to be part of this process. Hoping that the city can be a little more excited about the good things in the city's CHIP program, and excited to hear more about the things that can be improved and the ways we can give feedback to the city coming weeks. Leslie, if you want to share.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Leslie Ridings, a long-time resident of Northeast LA, now moving downtown because it's a much better commute. And yeah, one of the chapter leads for Eastside Housing for All. And yeah, I'm very, very passionate about housing. I'm also a member of the HAC. I think everybody here probably is too. Yeah, very excited to hear this presentation because, as always, it's always fun to, wonk out on some policy and be able to synthesize that and then help bring that to all the normies and convince them, no, wait, you should think about this. They really should. Big part of our mission is sort of like taking these somewhat obtuse and seemingly like amorphous housing policy ideas and sort of like bringing it down to a very approachable level and the level in which it has a very deep impact on not only our city's built form, but our lives and society. So very excited. Thank you guys for giving the presentation.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, take it away, Aaron and Scott. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for kind of setting us up, Jake, and for those great introductions, Leslie. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think honestly, what I found out early as a community advocate is the voices of no love to mystify the process. And quite frankly, planners have made a business of mystifying this whole thing because they've been told to make things harder to build housing for 50 years now. And so they created a whole infrastructure for how you can block housing in a dozen different ways. And now we are trying to chip away at that at various levels through advocacy and some political leadership in certain quarters. So yeah, this is not complicated stuff. It's about where we build housing and how much of that housing we build. So yeah, very excited to be here and see a bunch of friendly faces that I've seen before, and also some new folks. So again, I am the director of policy and research with Abundant Housing LA. I've been at AHLA for exactly a year. And I'm very excited that Aaron Barrall is with us today, who's a housing analyst, policy analyst at the Lewis Center at UCLA, which is one of our sort of top think tanks for housing policy in California and nationwide. And Aaron has been, actually digging into the details of the ordinance and seeing what does it actually do in terms of housing production, what does it do in terms of housing equity, and actually crunching the numbers to try to figure out how impactful this thing is going to be. So I think we'll just kind of like be very informal about this. We built this slide deck together and we'll kind of go back and forth. And also that informality should extend to the rest of the group as well. So if you have any questions at any time, just interrupt us. Okay, I'll share my screen. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Okay, can everyone, wait, let me put this into slideshow mode, presenter view. I think that's what I want, right? Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about sort of, how we got here, what the policy context is, and then we're going to go over just like an overview of what's in the CHIP ordinance, the major components. We'll talk about some of the good news, some of the not so good news, and what we think at this point are some key recommendations for how to improve the thing. So as Jake was referring to, this comes out of the state's housing accountability systems. How many of you have heard of like RENA? Is that something that you guys are aware of? I can't see your faces because I'm looking at the slides, but probably some of you.
A couple of us are sickos, don't worry. We know all about Rena.
The long and short of it is that the state requires every 8 years, the state requires every region in the state to plan to figure out how much housing we need in each of those regions and put a number to it. And then the regions go to and then the cities, it's the cities' turns. All the jurisdictions each jurisdiction has a number that they have to hit as well. And they create housing elements, which are their plans for how they're going to produce housing and affirmatively further fair housing over that 8-year period. And what they have, one of the things that they have to do is they have a number. And in the case of Los Angeles, it's almost 500,000 total units that LA has to plan for over that 8-year period. And they have to look at their current zoning, their current policies and regulation for what can be built where, and estimate how much of that that target, in this case about 450,000 units, can be accomplished through the current zoning and regulations. And if there's a gap, and in this case there's a large gap of about 250,000 units, then the city has to put together a rezoning program that will show that they can make up that gap by implementing policy changes, zoning changes that encourage the production of more housing in more places in the city. So the city is doing this in a few different ways. Some of you are aware of the community planning process. We have something on the order of, I think it's like 35 community plan areas across the city. That process is very fraught and often takes, in the current regime, something on the order of 20 years to get an update to a community plan, which is a big problem in our city, and a big reason why so much of our city is behind the times in terms of the zoning that's allowed on so many parcels. But the city will be using a couple big high-profile community plans, like the Hollywood plan and the downtown LA plan, to count towards that RHNA target. And a lot of the rest, they're going to be filling through this citywide housing incentive plan program, which we call the CHIP. So recently in March, we finally got a draft of the CHIP, as well as drafts of some other ordinances that are also part of the rezoning program, but are of secondary importance. So we're going to focus on the CHIP today. Aaron, do you want to kind of go over some of the main programs that the CHIP includes?
Sure. So the CHIP really includes 3 primary programs that you can see here. So the first is State Density Bonus Program. This is not really something that the city's doing by itself. They're basically just matching state law because they're legally required to match state law in most cases. There's a little bit of nuance there because LA was granted an exception for certain laws due to the TOC program. But basically, the first program is not really an upzoning in a traditional sense. It's just matching the state law. The second,
is it accurate to say, Aaron, that as a result of the changes to the state density, to how we deal with the state density bonus program in the CHIP, that many more of the density bonus program projects will be by right?
yes. So that's good news for this ordinance, and we'll definitely hopefully get to that here.
Can I ask a clarification? It got
Yes.
real wonky real fast. And,
yeah, that's true.
just to make sure I'm tracking.
Please.
The state density bonus program is about rezoning?
Yeah, so the state density bonus program is a state incentive program. So a state law created an incentive program which said that certain projects, if they meet certain eligibility criteria, if they have base zoning of 5 units or more, so you can't do it on a single family property, for example, and if you're at certain locations that are climate friendly, there's a bunch of stipulations. But if you meet those requirements and you also agree to set aside a certain proportion of units for deed restricted affordable housing, then you can ask for a series of incentives that would include increases in density, FAR, which is basically the size of your building, the height, parking reductions, a whole slew of things that could make your project more profitable because you could build more units, less costly because you don't have to build as much parking and things like that.
And so
We also have
the
Yeah.
you in this case is developers.
when I said you.
Yeah, like they were like, you could apply for these things.
Yeah, I was putting myself sort of in the shoes of a housing developer. That's correct.
So this is a bonus program for housing developers.
That's exactly right.
Okay, got it.
Which will benefit the future tenants as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
because
So
we'll be able to deliver those.
the developers. So it incentivizes the developers, provides benefits to them, and the idea is that would help build more housing.
Correct.
Okay.
That's exactly
And
correct.
it's important to note too that a lot of these density programs, bonuses, also they're not just handed out. Like there's usually something you have to give, like in terms of like affordable housing, you know, like some percentage of affordable housing, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
so yeah. So the normal thing is like if you provide X% at Y affordability level of your units. So, oh, you want to do 100 units. Well, if you provide 10 at low income, then we'll let you put on an extra 10 units or something. Or if you provide 5 at very low, that also will be as good. So these are the different levels that were sort of different between the state and the city. Like the state was like, you need to do 5%. The city was like, you need to do 7%. And like that sort of disagreement actually just makes it really complicated to sign up for permits. So
And a lot of the building, the housing that's actually being built is being built as a result of these incentive programs. There's the state program. There are also local programs. So the major local one has been in recent years has been the Transit Oriented Communities program, which actually was a part of JJJ, a ballot measure that many of us voted for, and that a majority of Angelinos voted for. And so that is another, and it's the same concept. It's, you get certain incentives in exchange for setting aside a certain proportion of units for affordability. And this chip actually, so it changes the way we deal with the state density bonus program, improves it. It also updates and codifies the transit oriented communities program. So we're sort of updating how we deal with both our local and our state incentive programs. So I'll turn it back to Aaron.
Yeah, I think that was well summarized, and I appreciate you pausing us because I know that I work at a research center, and sometimes I'm really just in the weeds all day, and I need to be pulled out of that. So please do that again if you need to. Some of my presentation has some technical details there, but it's not the most important thing. But I think what Scott mentioned is fundamental. The way that the city is implementing the chip is by increasing the incentives and then changing the amount of affordability set-asides or inclusionary units, that is what they're called, for the programs. And the main program I think that the city is implementing is called the Mixed Income Incentive Program. And this includes transit-oriented incentive areas, which is essentially just TOC for people who are familiar. And TOC, again, is just Los Angeles's version of state density bonus, but a little bit better. Then there's also a new program called Opportunity Corridors. And there's another new program called Opportunity Transition Areas. The third major component, and this is also derived in some ways from state law, and then it goes above and beyond state law, is the Affordable Housing Incentive Program. So this really applies to projects that are 100% affordable to lower income residents. That basically means the entire project is going to be rented at below market rate. So there are different numbers that can be used, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the city is basing their affordability list on. But generally, you can think of if somebody who's making $70,000 a year or less, roughly around there, they could afford this. That's kind of what you're thinking. If somebody has updated affordability numbers, feel free to drop them in the chat.
So just to clarify, just to make sure I'm understanding. So all three of these programs are really for developers.
Correct. In order to incentivize them to both build more market rate and below market rate housing. So
And
these programs will, they encourage developers to include some lower income units, which basically don't ever get built without public subsidy otherwise, in exchange for having bigger projects that also include more market rate units too.
And because going back to the zoning element, so they're kind of willing to kind of forego some of the requirements that they're usually held to in these programs, like you don't have to build as much parking or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And the developers want the developers want that flexibility. You know, they're often required to do more than the market would really demand.
Okay.
So your question is great. I mean, and you know, I mean, basically, like, yeah. I mean, all of the cities across the state that are doing rezoning programs, the idea is to change kind of like, you know, how much you can build, you know, so that the market will sort of respond. There are also, you know, some cities are using public funds to develop housing. So, but the majority of the work in terms of like unleashing more housing in our cities is around changing the rules for how it's built. What's very weird and different about Los Angeles, they're doing something different than any other city, which is most cities are saying we're just going to change the base zoning, like the rules for a particular parcel. Like instead of only allowing single family dwellings on this parcel, in the future you're going to be able to do duplexes or fourplexes. LA is not doing that. They're building these incentive programs and not touching rezoning at all, base
Right.
rezoning at all, except in the community plans. So it's very unusual.
So it seems weird to call it a rezoning strategy because it's really project based, like for particular projects, we're gonna change the zoning rules.
Yeah, so it's not like, I mean, you know, these are pretty broad geographies, so you'll see the maps in just a second, but like all of these incentive programs are associated with different geographies. So like there's a transit one, which is an update to the TOC program that we already have, which is associated with, you know, adjacency to transit, like a radius on how far you are from transit. There is the high opportunity program, which is high opportunity is housing speak for affluent areas, basically. And so a lot of the focus of this plan is like, how do we create more zone capacity in the richer areas that with more more jobs, more services, more amenities, less environmental hazards, all of that stuff, which have traditionally been exclusionary areas. So that's another geography associated with another program. And then the affordable housing incentive program sort of has the broadest geography, which is kind of exciting. I think Aaron will go into that a little bit later.
One quick comment. You said it's kind of on a project by project basis, but I do want to say that I think part of what this does is it makes it a lot more clear, sets out what the rules are, and tells developers you will get these bonuses if you follow X, Y, and Z rules, rather than it being decided by some board for each individual project. So
Right.
it makes it a lot more clear. It gives them a lot of different options of programs they can choose to use, but they basically have a set of rules they have to follow to get these bonuses, and then they get the bonuses.
And if they follow the rules, many of these projects across many of these different sub-programs will have a by right ministerial pathway, which means they don't have to do neighborhood councils and planning commissions and planning and land use committee and all that gamut of discretionary hearings. So they're also not prone to lawsuits and all of that kind of stuff. So that also provides, you know, I think Joe was kind of was alluding to that, but that provides a lot more certainty about the rules and your path forward for the developers.
That's true. Yeah, that's correct. So maybe we'll go to the next slide, but I also know that Leslie had a
one
comment in there, and I see
question,
that
sorry.
Zach has one, and Josh. Okay. 3
Uh,
questions and comments.
Is this all just the city of LA? Like, does this apply to the sort of the enclave municipalities that are
It
LA
only
County?
applies to
LA
the
Philly?
city of Los Angeles. Yeah.
This is
Okay.
yeah, this is purely LA. So every jurisdiction in Los Angeles and in California has to create their own housing elements. And everyone that is short, that can't show that they can reasonably get to the housing target has to do a rezoning program. So this is the rezoning program for the city of LA, which is of course our biggest city in California at 4 million-ish folks. So it's a big deal. So what does it do? We talked a little bit about all of these things.
Scott, I just want to pause you for a second. I think Leslie has
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Scott. I just wanted to provide some context because I see Zach also made a comment in the chat about how I wanted to keep by right development restrictive, and I think just some context that undergirds all of this. Again, very wonky, so thank you for your patience, but it's very important the way we live our lives. Is that the city of Los Angeles, their land use regime is predicated on this concept of value capture, which means that they set, I think, in my opinion, pretty restrictive rules. And the idea being that when people want to build something, they have to come to the table and say, and the city can then extract something from them. So that's sort of like the world that we're entering into, where all of a sudden the city's now trying to like make it a little bit easier because it knows that it needs to, both to meet like state demands and also just the obvious demands of reality that we need more housing. But they also don't want to go like too far, so they're trying to like work all these different like rules. And somebody else can correct me if they think that's off base, but like that's sort of the world this is all predicated on. Is the city wants to pull things out of the people that want to like create an important service and homes for people and stuff like that. So that's what this comes from. So
Yeah, I would say there is a very live debate around inclusionary zoning, and its benefits and its harms.
I think the Lewis Center might have settled that debate, but okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, so read Shane's piece. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet. I think there are very important questions about, what the downside impacts of this kind of inclusionary zoning regime that so many states and cities rely on. But it is a reality that we have to deal with. Okay, so back to the task at hand.
Yeah, I do want to jump
Anything
in
to
about
add on this?
the approval process reform. The city is streamlining a lot of projects compared to the existing rules with this CHIP ordinance. So not everything necessarily would be considered by right or ministerial, which basically means, hey, it doesn't have to go through the planning commission. Nobody needs to vote on it. But they still have that ability for certain projects that request different bonuses or incentives that are kind of far above the norm. We're talking about the city calls them like more egregious things. I'm not sure I would use the word egregious generally, like for housing development like this, but basically things that are proposing larger changes to what would otherwise be allowed. Those can still go through the discretionary process in some instances. But if you basically, by you, I mean the developer, if a developer goes and uses an incentive that's on their list of things that are basically included, then they would not need to go through that discretionary process. So this is an improvement for sure over the existing pathways, and it's going to hopefully speed up the process for some projects.
Yeah, and I will say locally with Executive Directive 1, which is the mayor's signature housing initiative, we have seen the power of this kind of by right pathway. There's been tremendous interest, even from the private sector, in building 100% affordable housing. If you can have that certainty that you're going to get your permits and you're not going to get screwed around by a neighborhood council or a city council member who doesn't like housing or anything like that. So I concur with Aaron that this is a pretty big deal. So TOC, as Aaron and I were saying, this is an update to an existing program. And so, this is related to, there's different tiers related to the quality of the transit that you're nearby for your project. And you can get a bunch of extra stuff. Again, if you set aside a certain proportion of units. Aaron, would you say that that these incentives are above what we have seen with TOC? Are they more generous?
Yes, definitely. These represent an increase to some of what you can get under the existing TOC program. So it's actually a pretty decent increase too, but the magnitude of the numerical change isn't necessarily everything. And so I can talk about that a little bit more later.
Okay.
But in some cases, like tier 1 right now, like starts at say a 50% bonus in a lot of cases. It's going to go to 100% within the chip. So that's pretty substantial. And then there's also some very substantial increases to the floor area ratio, or FAR incentives. For people who aren't familiar with FAR, it essentially regulates how much volume you could have in a building, is I think the easiest way to explain it. So those are also going to go up pretty decently within the TOC programs. The other side
So
is
basically, what we're saying is we can double the number of units in a project.
And there are some high bonuses too. So I think overall the TOC, or the transit oriented incentive area, which is what they're calling it now, there are pretty good updates to it, but it's not going to unlock any new land, kind of as we discussed already. Though I will say that it does provide better benefits for kind of lower density or lower intensity multifamily zones than it did before. And so that's nice. And that's actually kind of a linchpin of the city's strategy, is to unlock certain zones that, due to their existing standards, like maybe they're considered multifamily, but they're actually hard to build in. Now they're going to be a little bit easier with this, and then the following programs too. And Zach or Thomas, you have a
Yeah, so just one clarifying question with TOC.
Mhm.
So specifically, this is for folks on the east side. So one of the issues with the original TOC program was that single family neighborhoods were broadly exempted from TOC. And so you had places like, the Expo line going through West LA and Westwood, where the Expo line stations are surrounded by single family homes, and none of those. And so developers could, in theory, build new housing around transit to get more ridership up, but they're not because of single family zones. Whereas the east side, generally, there's no single family, and so you do see developers building around transit. This doesn't change that, right? Single family zones are still exempted from.
They're still exempted.
Unfortunately, they're exempted from all of the programs,
Okay. except
for there's a very minor thing where a faith-based organization can do a project in a single-family area, and I think I'm personally skeptical that that's going to have much yield. So I would say we're skipping to sort of we're giving a highlight, skipping to what I think is this is our biggest concern, probably our number one concern, which is 70%, 75% of land in Los Angeles is single family zoned. Much of that land is adjacent to transit and services and jobs, and it is off limits for this program. The city has decided not to touch it. So that's a huge lost opportunity for housing production and affirmatively furthering fair housing. And I would argue it's a displacement creator, because where is the development pressure going to go? It's going to go to existing multifamily housing areas that are already developed. And so, Abundant Housing LA does not oppose redeveloping land that has human beings on it already. as long as those human beings are taken care of. But there's no doubt that exempting single family zones from a program this important is going to create more human turmoil, and than the alternative. So it's very concerning.
Can
Yeah, and
I?
I'll, oh, sorry, you
Oh,
go ahead.
oh, after your clarification, I'm gonna try to say it in normie terms to see if I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the other thing I would add is that the city has a duty under state law to do something called affirmatively furthering fair housing, which basically means to reduce segregation and improve opportunities and invest in areas that have, historically lacked investment. So there's a whole complement of tools that the city can do and requirements that they have committed to in their housing element already. In order to meet those AFFH or fair housing objectives, the city initially proposed to include a lot of single family homes along transit corridors and within TOC areas to expand TOC, and they removed that. And that has some pretty negative and demonstrably impactful effects to their fair housing plan.
Okay,
Yeah.
can I try translating to see if I
Go
understand?
ahead, please.
Okay, so this TOC program, it already exists, and it's just modifying the rules in the existing TOC areas, but single family home zones are excluded, which is a lot of LA.
That's 100% accurate. And not only does it exclude single family areas, it actually also excludes the program as is now, also excludes any low density multifamily zone that doesn't zone for at least 5 homes. So if you're R2, it's duplex zoning, or some RD zones. It's a lot of numbers and letters, but there are a lot of different zones. There are many parcels in Los Angeles that allow a duplex or a triplex, maybe even a fourplex, but nothing more than that. And those, you can't do TOC in those programs, on those sites. And those also, because there are less human beings on those parcels right now, are lower displacement risk parcels than parcels that have larger buildings with more human beings in them. So really, the city is really putting a target on the back of renters with their plan.
Yeah, I will say that the update to the TOC does improve some of the existing rules to allow maybe those really small multifamily properties. It will allow more of them to be redeveloped in the future. So if there's like a duplex, there's potentially a chance that it could be rebuilt now as maybe a 5 or 6plex, but I still need to do some of the math for some example parcels. But I know we're already 7:45, so we'll.
Yeah, are we like kind of at time, guys?
I think I would say keep going. We'll as we get closer to 8, we'll assess. But yeah, definitely
Yeah.
keep. I think we've been moving the questions to the presentation instead of after. So keep, which is good. I think keep going.
Yeah, so let's look at the corridor program now. So this is a new program called Opportunity Corridors, and I hate to say it, but I feel like it's a little bit of an oxymoron in some situations, and I'll explain why. But opportunity corridors are major roads with frequent transit, so at least a bus coming every 30 minutes for the lowest zone or the least intense zone, then 15 minutes for like the moderate or the kind of the teal color on the map, though it's a little hard to see here. And then the third one are opportunity corridors within a half mile of a rail station. And these need to be located within something called the high or highest opportunity census tract. These census tracts, they are analyzed every year and determined by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. So every year they come out with a new map called the opportunity maps. So if you Google California opportunity maps, you'll see these maps and you'll see where the high and the highest opportunities are. So opportunity corridors, again, the geography is limited to basically those major roads with frequent transit and then the high and highest opportunity tracks. And then beyond that, a lot of the standards are very close to the transit-oriented communities program. So we don't need to worry too much about like the specifics. I'm happy to answer questions about that if we need to. But the main intent of the city is say, hey, let's allow 4 to 7 story buildings along these corridors. In some cases, these are already allowed, and in some cases they're not. And so because a lot of the opportunity corridors kind of are where TOC already applies, I'm not sure this is going to be a huge effect, but it does definitely expand the potential to certain areas where it doesn't, especially in San Fernando Valley, which I think is good. You can see in Chatsworth, there are some corridors there. Sherman Oaks also, like Ventura Boulevard, that's not part of the TOC program, but that's included here. Though, of course, you know, Ventura Boulevard already has skyscrapers in a lot of places. So, you know, like how much is it really going to change? I think that's still to be determined. But, you know, overall, this is one of the programs that the city is including to help further their equity goals, as well as further their kind of like transit-oriented planning.
I will also say that like you know this plan basically says you can build housing in high opportunity areas, but in the most polluted locations in those high opportunity areas. Right? I mean, the commercial corridors are like, you know, the air is almost as bad as on a freeway, you know, in most of our commercial corridors because of the amount of vehicles moving through. So, you know, I think there's equity implications there that we also have to be aware of.
Yeah, there are absolutely equity implications there, especially with air pollution and noise pollution are going to be the two most frequent. Those are important. Okay, so let's maybe go to the next slide.
Yep, you're there.
Yeah, and this is a new program called the Opportunity Transition Program. So this is something that is pretty interesting from the city, and I like the intent of it a lot. I think that it could hopefully be improved a little bit too. Basically, what this does is it takes some of those really low density multifamily properties already. So again, think of something with maybe a duplex on it. So R2 or RD zone properties near those high opportunity corridors. And then it's going to allow certain types of small new apartments and small multifamily developments to occur on those that currently would not be allowed. So there would be 4 to 10 units max allowed, depending on the distance to corridor, and then pretty low FARs, but still potentially reasonable to achieve these types of projects. And then there's a lot of design and public realm requirements. The intent of this ordinance is to say, hey, let's allow things like bungalow courts or courtyard apartments, which the current regulations kind of make illegal. But let's allow them near the corridors. The major flaw, I think, with this program, well, is, you know, the number of units allowed is pretty low overall for a lot of these parcels. But it also just doesn't apply to that many parcels, and it's kind of hard to see on the map. And so I'll link the city's maps at the end of this presentation so you can scroll through and look at it yourself. But really, we see here that there are not a lot of parcels eligible for this program. So again, it's a little bit in the valley. There's some kind of in the Fairfax district and a little bit in Mid-City, and that's kind of it. We're not really seeing anything else. And so part of this is because the city made a decision to broadly exclude any property within a historic district, which would, you know, that's not necessarily a bad idea per se in every case, but I think it's kind of it's a broad exclusion, especially for this particular program for the city. And there are limited distances between, I guess that this would apply to from the back of a corridor. So it would only apply within 350 feet of the corridor or like the back of a parcel fronting the corridor to be specific, which is not even half a block in most cases. So we're allowing, you're saying, okay, we're going to allow 4 to 10 units, maybe 3 to 4 houses down from a corridor, and that's about it. And so that's why these maps, the brown colors that indicate the opportunity corridor transition areas, there's not a lot of brown on this map. But I will say I like the idea of this. I think it's a program that has potential, and hopefully can be strengthened and improved with good feedback from the public.
This, by the way, I think, if the city was going to upzone single family areas with this kind of missing middle strategy that are adjacent to corridors and services and jobs, I would probably say there's some courage going on here. That would be a very significant thing. If along the E line in Westwood and Rancho Park, all of a sudden you could build buildings of the exact same scale as the single family homes there. 4 to 10 units, that would be a big deal. But they have limited the geography of this so much that it's not particularly meaningful. But this is an opportunity for us to have our voice heard and ask for more.
Sorry, just one thing I wanted to maybe highlight that I think you both might take a little for granted when you said, oh, the historic thing is very broad. If you're not aware, you might hear like, oh, historic zone, that must just be for like the most special parts of LA. But actually, even along, say, the new Purple Line stops, like the Wilshire, I want to say the Wilshire La Brea one, but it might be one over closer to the Grove. Almost all of that is a historic area, even though you might not think of that for the Grove. And then similarly, since this is the Eastside chapter, I actually believe most of the parts of Highland Park right around the it's not the Gold Line anymore, the A line. If you've ever wondered why they're just kind of low slung, mostly single family homes right next to a train station, it's technically historic. So that also is one of these areas that would not be covered as long as that's exempted, which is maybe kind of a bummer if you think we should build more housing by trains.
Yeah, definitely a big discussion at both the state and local level around historic preservation and the obstacles it presents for housing equity and production.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that I'm not saying that we should demolish historic buildings. That's not my point. But if you look at the map of Los Angeles historic districts, there are a lot of properties included in areas that maybe could use a little bit more housing. So just being, I think, a little bit more deliberate, within, how that's calculated and how that's excluded, especially from these ordinances, would be powerful.
Yeah, and we also know that that the historic preservation process is utilized by folks that don't want housing, and so who sometimes admit it very explicitly. So the process is political for sure. It's not like these things like a architecture expert is looking at everywhere in Los Angeles and deciding which places are historic. It's very much a political process. Okay, affordable housing program.
Yeah, I want to talk about this because I'm excited about this program. I think that the city did a good job on this, and I do think that the city did an overall decent job of trying to balance like the rest of the ordinance too, even if there's a lot of room for improvement. But this is exciting because it allows for unlimited density near public transit in low vehicle mile traveled areas. So basically areas where you just don't need to drive as much, or when you do drive, you don't have to drive as far to get to work or the grocery store, anything like that. And then also medium to high opportunity census tracts. So the first two, the unlimited density near transit and low VMT for affordable housing, That's basically state law. What the city did here, which is really exciting and interesting, is in a medium or high opportunity census tract that applies. And that's really good because there are definitely a ton of areas, especially in the San Fernando Valley, especially in mid-city area, that maybe don't exist quite close enough to a train station or quite close enough to a bus stop, but are otherwise pretty decent places to build new housing. This would allow more affordable housing in those neighborhoods, which I think is great. There are substantial bonuses and incentives for the FAR and even the height in these neighborhoods, and they're actually higher in the high opportunity census tracts than they are around transit, which I think is pretty interesting. And so that's kind of a cool, unique program that the city is definitely going above and beyond state law here. The other thing that's good about this is it applies to faith-based or, both publicly owned or faith-based owned properties. And the publicly owned that's exciting because it means that the zoning won't really be a problem if a local agency decides to build affordable housing on their property that they own. Faith-based is exciting because the city has, again, been a little bit more loose with their definitions than the state law that kind of prompted this change. And it will allow faith-based organizations to actually buy new properties in single-family areas and then rebuild them. And so I know that the city's getting a ton of pushback on that particular issue because it's very different than the state law. And so that's maybe something that the city could probably use some positive feedback on, if I were to guess, because that's a good change. I don't think it's going to be used a lot, but having that flexibility, say for a faith-based organization, okay, we want to sell our old lot, maybe move to a new one, and then have some affordable housing there too. This would enable that in a way that the state law does not.
This feels like it could be a huge deal because we have a pretty good data point on this with Executive Directive 1. Probably the two main things that made Executive Directive 1 work were a ministerial pathway and unlimited density, because most projects used unlimited density from the state density bonus program.
Correct.
And this program has both of those things, right, Aaron?
Yes. This is almost like an ED1 on steroids, if I might say it. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how ED1 and this work together. It's a bit confusing to me even, but you can think of this as taking some of the best parts of ED1 and then codifying it here.
The more I learn about this, the more I think maybe this just puts ED1 out of business. I don't know.
I think pretty much
streamlining.
What's that? Say that again, Joe.
I asked if it includes streamlining, if all the projects are by right with this program.
Right.
Yeah, most of them will be. At least that's my understanding.
Also, does it apply to non-faith-based or publicly owned properties?
Yeah, so this also applies to all of the existing multifamily zoned and commercially zoned land.
I didn't realize that part.
So that's really good. The other two only apply in single family. Well, not only apply in single family zones, I should say they're not excluded from single family zones.
So just to flag the chat, I think it's a good question to answer, is just, can we give like a 1-minute recap of ED1 and what it's done in the last year and why it's been so impactful, just for folks who may not be following?
Yeah, absolutely. ED1 is Mayor Bass's signature housing program. It was the first thing she did in office. It is a streamlining program for 100% affordable housing. It does a couple basic things. It says to city planning, for an eligible project, you have to get that project entitlements in 60 days. It also puts those projects on a ministerial pathway by right. None of those discretionary hearings. And those projects, most of them use the state density bonus program, which gets them unlimited density. That means they can put a lot of small housing units on a moderate sized parcel. And essentially what we're seeing is sort of like, are you familiar with like kind of the brick masonry buildings, maybe 6 stories that you see in a place like Koreatown or Miracle Mile? We're sort of seeing the contemporary versions of those buildings. Modest housing for people of not particularly high means, but high quality housing in good locations. And so this program has sort of created a pipeline, most of which is privately financed, which was completely unexpected, for that kind of housing. And this program that has the AHIP, and the CHIP has a lot of those same features. And in terms of its success, we've seen something on the order of between 16 and 17,000 units proposed in a year and a third, or whatever it is now, which is pretty unprecedented in terms of numbers. We'll see how many of those actually get constructed. Some of them, may not be. And there's a lot of discussion about how these projects are going to be financed, but it's a pretty tremendous success. Joe is an expert on this as well, so if he has anything to add, happy to. Okay.
I do not.
All right. Joe?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think one thing that I would say here, and probably why I'm excited about this, is because there's no base unit threshold like there are in the other programs. The way that the city words it is a little wonky too. But essentially, if you have a 5,550 square foot lot that's zoned for any type of multifamily right now, you have no max density and then an FAR of 3.5 if you're in a highest opportunity area, or moderate, actually, moderate, high, or highest, which covers a lot of the city. And so that's good. For me, the unknown here is about those historic preservation districts. The city includes properties that are clearly within historic preservation districts on this map, but not on the last map that I showed you. And so I'm trying to figure out, is that a mapping error, or did I misunderstand the ordinance, or is there just something else that I missed, and trying to explain that. So I think the success of this and the total eligible parcels we partially determined based off the results of that. So I have some emails out to the city to see if they can clarify that. I'll certainly let Scott know, and hopefully he'll pass the message on.
What I
Yeah.
think it applies for a stock is if it's a designated, and it's the same for ED1, if it's a designated structure within a district, you can't demolish it. But
Yeah.
if it's an empty lot or non-contributing structure in a historic district, then it's a fair game.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my reading when I was looking at the ordinance as well. But I was confused about not just the AHIP, but like the mixed income, because it would seem that some of the non-contributing parcels in some of those HPOZs would be eligible for the mixed income incentive programs, but they don't seem to show up on the maps.
They
So,
don't. And I asked the city, I said, is anything within an HPOZ excluded from mixed income? And they said yes. And so I think if that's true, again, if that's true, if their answer to me was true, then that's something I'm concerned with. It really should be parcels or properties that are contributing to that district that have been recognized as such. And then there's maybe some more grounds. So I think there's more to talk about here, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time so we can try to do some recaps. And then I'd love to hear what this group thinks about it too, or if you have any feedback based off your expertise. We can skip this slide, yeah. So I think the positive highlights, I do want to talk about these. We've mentioned them mostly, but the affordable housing overlay that we just went over is really good. And I don't want to qualify it too much. The improved review process is good too. The incentives for new development in the high opportunity neighborhoods is exciting. I'm not sure that it's enough to really overcome historic land use patterns and segregationist desires of the people who wrote the existing zoning ordinance, but it's a step in the right direction and it has at least the potential to do some good. And then the final comment is about unlocking these RD and R2 zones, which right now are really hard to build in, but are already zoned for multifamily. So, even though it's a limited geography and it's not clear exactly how the math would work on these parcels, I respect the attempt, and I think it's going to be useful in a lot of cases to at least allow something here where basically nothing can happen now. So those are some really good things for the ordinance. I don't know if you want to take this one, Scott. I can keep
Yeah,
going.
I'm happy to. I mean, I think we also talked about most of this.
We did.
But and this is we do want you to take this away with you, because I hope as many of you as possible will be able to attend on the 27th and give feedback directly to city planning. We are co-hosting this event with them so that they hear from more voices. This is actually a part of their effort to hear from underrepresented voices like tenants. And so we need as many folks in the room as possible expressing the areas of concern. Fair housing is a huge one. We talked about how single family is off the table in the current draft, and how that that sustains patterns of segregation. We talked about how this focus on major corridors has real environmental justice implications. The exclusion of these low density zones, both single and family, multifamily, also has a big impact on how much housing we can build, which is a problem. And another thing that I will note that we didn't really talk about so much yet is, because all of these things are sort of incentive based, and because there are existing incentive programs already, it's an open sort of question about the extent to which, how much will developers take advantage of these incentive programs, and how much marginal yield will we get from them? Probably will help in certain locations, but in some places the developers may have basically what they need on a particular parcel, and they've already hit up against certain limits, like you go over 6 stories, you have to deal with more expensive building materials. They weren't going to do that anyway. So there's a real question, I think, with this incentive-based approach about whether the city is really meeting the targets that it is claiming to meet. And then we also talked pretty extensively about how we had a view the protection of these low density parcels as really a displacement creator and an injustice for our tenants. So yeah, let's move to any questions and discussion.
And I'll take moderator's prerogative just to say, since folks may need to jump since we're over time, Scott and Aaron, are there ways that folks can contact you with further questions if they don't have time to ask right now?
Of course, I'll put my my email, and I would love to hear from you.
Likewise, we appreciate the patience. I know that we are over time, and it's a Wednesday night, so thanks for hanging out as we talk about zoning.
Can you post the link to the PDF with the maps on it?
Yes, I will actually post the live map so you can scroll around and look at your neighborhood.
I wasn't able to find it on the planning website.
Yeah, anything.
I found it through that story map thing. Is that where you found it, Aaron? Is there a separate link for just the map?
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna share.
Okay.
And then just real quick before folks jump, we'll talk more about this later, but the city has reached out and asked folks, specifically who live on the east side, So if you live in Boyle Heights, Highland Park, Lincoln Heights, El Sereno, even broadly, probably up to like Cypress Park, Glassell Park, Eagle Rock, right? On the 27th, the morning, El Sereno Library, the city staff will actually be coming to us and asking for feedback, which is awesome. Usually we have to call the city and tell them what we think there are. I saw someone in the chat ask, like, what are the areas, how do we tell the city the areas of She's actually coming to us and asking for feedback. So this is a really unique opportunity. So if you have to jump, I would just say before you jump,
Yeah.
being at that meeting is a great opportunity to give that kind of constructive feedback. Scott, if you want to add anything more.
I love that plug. I love that plug, and I will say that we chose to do this on the East Side. One, because this chapter is amazing, and we knew that there'd be fantastic leadership to help draw folks there. But number two, because the city was particularly interested in hearing from folks on the East Side. They have not traditionally heard from as many voices on the East Side. So please get as many people there as possible, but it doesn't have to be just East Siders. This is a public meeting open to anyone, and the more feedback, the better. So invite anybody who you think would be interested in this. Should we wrap it there so you guys can get to the rest of your business, Thomas?
I think I will go ahead and say, like, if folks need to jump, like Scott and Aaron, if either you need to jump, feel free. If folks on the call need to jump, we have been recording, so we will also post this later. I would like to give a couple opportunities for questions before we officially end this part of the meeting.
I'm happy to stay. I just wanted to be respectful of the chapter's time, but that sounds great to me.
Yeah. And then I'll also just say one last thing. If folks want, I saw folks, if you want to be invited to the Google Calendar for the meeting with the city, put your email in to the chat, and I will make sure that you're invited to that meeting. So if you want to be able to know, hey, how do I get feedback to the city? And then with that, if folks have questions, feel free to ask. We can take a I'll say maybe another 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll cut it and move to the last few items of business.
Yeah, thanks, Zachary, for dropping your email in the chat as well. And also, we now have a Eventbrite link as well that I dropped in there. Yeah, you can RSVP there, and we'll be in touch. But yeah, Scott, Zachary, I'll make sure to reach out to you personally as well.
Other questions?
Can we get these slides, like especially the last two slides, as like kind of talking points that we should make?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll be sure to send out talking points before the April 27th meeting. I think the long and short of it is that instead of just going the normal route, right, in terms of just saying like you can build more housing on these properties because we've changed the zoning, the city created a bunch of complicated processes that aren't going to do enough to reverse our segregation patterns, and we have deep concerns about whether they're going to build the housing that the city of LA has committed to build. I think that would be. Does anyone else have kind of like an elevator pitch they would use to summarize, what their critiques or what their concerns with the CHIP and the other housing programs would be?
I think a big thing is the order of magnitude versus what the rezone program was shown in the housing element. I think is an important point to make. And that this mostly impacts properties that are already included in existing incentive programs, and this is better incentive programs, but it's on the same properties.
Yeah,
I would
think
also
that's
add
the best thing. You
Go ahead, Aaron.
Thomas. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that going off of Joseph's point, allowing these incentives in more and different places than they already are even beyond what they proposed, is probably the most important thing. So I think that changing the base zoning is desirable, but the city's not going to do that here. And so I think it's important to mention to them, but like focusing only on that will probably fall on deaf ears. I think from a strategic standpoint, that's my interpretation of it at least. And so saying, hey, we think that the corridor programs are good. We think that the opportunity transition areas are good starts, but like they need to be expanded beyond where they are right now. I think, for me, like what's on this slide, a no-brainer would be saying, hey, if you're already on one of the corridors that would otherwise be eligible, throw the single-family homes in. Like it's on the corridor. There's no planning reason why it shouldn't be included. That would unlock a lot of places in the valley, which would be pretty good. But I'll give it back to you, Thomas.
All I was going to add is that I think one specific, again, thinking specifically about the East Side, right? That the city has paid a lot of lip service through the housing element process to, hey, we want to try to build in high opportunity areas. We want to try to reverse patterns of segregation. We want to try to, stop concerns around gentrification, displacement, and in shifting so that these new and in some cases updated incentive programs are not applicable in a lot of the most affluent areas of the city, either through historic preservation or single family zoning exclusions. They're basically going back on all that rhetoric and doing so in a very and they told us, my understanding, I'm not an expert, but you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. They told the state, right, in their kind of initial draft of the housing element that got approved, hey, we have these goals. And then after the state approved and they actually had to get into the details of the rezoning, that's when they backtracked. Is that a fair characterization?
That's correct.
So calling them out on it and in a respectful way, right? Like I think I appreciate Aaron and Scott, you guys saying like, hey, they're actually doing a lot of good stuff in these programs. Like it's not that this is poorly intentioned. It's just that there was a pullback of the ambition, specifically in the areas where if we're gonna actually shift the burden of housing the city to the more affluent areas and away from areas that are experiencing gentrification, like you can't pull back in the way that the city has done.
Yeah, no, and there's I think there's a very powerful argument to be made around the geographic implications of reducing capacity in places like the West Side too, right? In my view, the biggest danger in terms of displacement is not building in more marginalized places, as long as it doesn't directly displace individuals. It's not building in the high opportunity areas because the displacement pressure is on the demand side. It's those people that have higher incomes and can no longer afford to live in Mid-City West or Sawtell or Santa Monica, moving to West Adams and Highland Park and places and then the rents in those locations increase. And so to whatever extent you guys can talk about your own experience and from where you sit geographically in the city, I think that's very powerful.
All right. Well, if there's one more question, I have time for one more question, then we'll cut it and let our generous presenters go after an hour and 20 minutes of going. So.
I think one final closing note for me, and then I'll be done for real, is the city did come up with their tenant protections ordinance, which includes some really good anti-displacement measures that I think we should all be excited about too. I know our focus today was on the CHIP, but the city's doing some good work there as well. And if there's a chance to commend them for that in your meeting, I would potentially take that opportunity.
You could even pair that message with the other message. You
Right.
could say, I so appreciate that you have this tenant protection ordinance. Please also protect tenants by putting some of the redevelopment pressure on the single family areas.
Well, cool. Thanks everybody for having us. I appreciate it. I'm going to drop my email in one more time. So if you have any additional thoughts or questions or just things you'd like to see or done different or be done differently, feel free to email me and love to hear from you. Thanks for having us.
You
Awesome.
guys rock. We're so lucky to have this chapter and all of the great things that you do. So I just want to extend my appreciation and looking forward to seeing many of you soon.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, guys.
We appreciate all the hard work. All right.
All right, so
we're
we
good.
have some, we have a few pieces of business. Well, that was really good, I thought.
Yeah, it was great to hear. I'm glad we had a good turnout. Jake, do you want to just real quick just do a brief pitch about the? I know we talked about a little bit, but the meeting on the 27th for folks who are still here.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll drop it in the chat again. We have an event coming up. The community meeting that this was educating folks about, that community meeting, that important community meeting is coming up a week from Saturday. That's Saturday, April 27th, at the Sereno Library. We're co-hosting with the City of LA. It'll be Eastside Housing for All, Abundant Housing LA, and the City of Los Angeles. As Thomas said, they want to come to us. They want to get info on how they can improve just on what folks think of these programs and of their incentive programs to make it easier to build housing, make it easier to build affordable housing. And we obviously have some thoughts. And we'll be curious to hear what you think as well. So we'll be sending out talking points in advance of that April 27th meeting. And if you're free, if you think you might be free, make sure to RSVP to the link here, dropping it again in case anyone missed it. Yeah, there's going to be breakfast burritos. We're going to have tamales. So come for breakfast. Come to learn about housing. Come to see your housing friends, and yeah, we're gonna get a lot of folks out there, and look forward to having everyone share what they think.
You had me at burrito. Yeah. So just the other, I'll just real quick mention 3 other things coming up. So after the meeting on the 27th, there is a happy hour on the, is it the 15th? I lost
14th,
my
I think.
place. 14th, thank you. At Highland Park Brewery. And that is a co-hosting Eastside Housing, but also Abundant Housing. So folks on the call. Be great to have you there. There's also an ADU seminar that Josh is not here anymore, but he is hosting. I don't know, Jake, if you know, I signed up for it because I have a garage I would like to turn into an ADU, and I've been doing some scoping, but I would like to learn more. So I don't know, Jake, if you know any more details. Share,
I know it's being hosted by Andrew Slocum, Abundant Housing LA member, really bright guy. And it's the kind of thing that a lot of organizations, I think charge for this kind of educational event. Andrew's just giving it away for free because he wants more people to be able to build housing.
Awesome. And then was that I lost my notes. So do we have a third one, or is that our?
Yeah, we had we have the happy hour, the ADU workshop, and we're gonna have an invitation to join our leads if anybody's interested. No pressure. You don't have to commit to anything right now, but feel free to reach out to any one of us if there is interest in that. We're always looking for a few good humans. No robots.
No robots, no AI.
No AI. I think that's it. I mean, our chapter business is like pretty limited this month, but I was very happy to see folks turn out for the presentation. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. All right.
And part one of that ADU workshop is going to be Thursday, April 27th on Zoom, dropping that registration in the chat also.
Well, I'm gonna sign up for that right now.
Awesome. Well, if there are no further questions, we can hereby call this meeting adjourned.
Darren,
Hopefully-
late, 8:30, but it was a good meeting. So thanks, guys, for your patience.
Hopefully we'll see everyone on the 27th. Or no, 27th is the city meeting, and then the 25th is the ADU. Is that the?
Yeah, 25th is
Yeah.
ADU, and then 27th is the CHIP program at El Sereno Library. So looking forward to it.
That's good.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.